Okay. Yep, I got it.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, we got Tim and Ed Rando. Hey, how are you, Ed? Haven't see you,
I'm
or
okay,
did I miss
Tom.
you on the previous meeting?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Aha. Okay. All right. Good to see you back.
Hello, Johnny. It's Julie.
Hey. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And you?
Very good. Hey, I thought it would take you another half an hour to be able to log in.
That is great. I wanted to check with you to see if it's okay if I dial back in about 30 minutes, or if you wanted me to just
No, that's fine.
okay.
That will be fine. Oh, I'm glad you're able to check and make sure the system works.
All right. Well, I'll be back in half an hour. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. All right. I guess our guest speaker have successfully tested the system, which was something I was wondering about anyway, whether it's going to work. You never know when the first time logging into some system that, yeah, you get surprised or something. All right, we'll give the folks a few minutes to log in. See. Hello, Rebecca and Nick. How are you guys?
Hi there, very good, thank you.
Good to hear.
Hello.
This is that's Nick. Okay, all right.
It's Dave.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited that I have listened to Secretary Lorenz speak, and I thought, huh, it's a refreshing perspective. So okay, got to invite her to our meeting. So I'm glad. We were trying to do that last month, last minute, near last minute schedule conflict. But I'm glad she seemed to be able to keep our slot today. So I'm looking forward to that. And I see Maria. Hey, Maria. And welcome down. Good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Good to have you. And hey, Elena, did we ask if we can record the session from Secretary?
I did ask, I didn't get a response. I can still record, but
we
I
can
won't.
record it, and we can always delete it if she says no, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We'll do it. Then ask for permission. No, actually, we did ask for permission. So, all right. Hey, folks. Oh, hey, Steve. Good to have you.
Hello.
Hey. All right. You guys know that, right? All right. We'll go ahead start. Secretary Lorenz is going to join us in 25 minutes at 11:30 Pacific time. And the first part, what I would like to do is to have a discussion about eVTOL for public service infrastructure needs. So my intention is not turn that into a presentation, but rather I have a few slides, but to generate dialogue and discussion and input. And let me go ahead and move to before I move to the next slide. one question for everybody is that the December meeting, we got a couple of choices, either the mid-December, December 15th, or December 22nd, which are getting close to Christmas. Does anybody has any preference? If you do, go ahead, speak up right now. So let's see whether there's a preference one or the other. If you don't speak out, which means that the December 22nd is okay with you guys? Okay, all right. Sounds like that may be a go. All right. So I'm going to move to the slides, and I will not dwell all the details about the slides, but use that to generate a dialogue. How do I page advance the slides? Now, there you go. Have to find the right key. Okay, I put this topic called the Dynamic Infrastructure Development for eVTOL AM Public Service Mission. I know it's a mouthful, but it sounds fancy, right? But what it really is, there's a lot of discussion and work being put in on the eVTOL or AAM infrastructure. There's regional air mobility, try to leverage the airports and so on, how to adapt to regional transport, vertical capabilities sometimes in many cases, and also the air taxi, urban air mobility, which looking at urban air transport facilities in the cities, in the suburb, or whatever. But as we have some discussion in the past, that the interesting part is that during emergency or in other public service missions, how do we change or how do we support our mission? There's two primary modes in what I can identify. One is the daily use. In other words, for example, hospital, clinics, and so on may have one or two the first responder carrying platform or get them to the site, police use and whatever, the ambulance functions and so on, that there's many what I call the routine use, or even fire departments taking the coordinator onto the site quickly, and then probably bring more additional supporting over maybe faster than what we can do on the ground machines, fire engines and so on. And not to replace the fire engine, but the ability to get there and also be able to get a bird's eye view quickly up there and figure out what the strategy is, etc. So there's many use cases that what I call the fixed base operation, that we can operate from pre-arranged locations to go our daily missions. But in some cases, at some times, we may have to leverage existing non-public service mission airports or vertiports to operate. So that's one. The second one is during disasters, natural disasters, emergency, man-made disaster, whatever. Sometimes the location is unknown, unpredictable. We have to get a whole bunch of resources, kind of like what we're doing right now. eVTOL and AM, it's just additional capabilities that we can bring to the staging areas and so on. That's a different story. We don't necessarily have pre-existing, fully set up base to operate from. How do we support those operations, spare parts and fuel and charging systems and so on. So that's the two primary different mode that both covers different kinds of public service missions. So one of the questions we have is that remember what the white paper we wrote is about. Okay, here are some of the use cases for eVTOL and some of the challenges we need to address. Within there, we kind of talk about some of the infrastructure, but now if we look at, say, hey, those are good, we got a lot of good response, say, those are good use cases, and there's some more we haven't put into the white paper. But now, how do we make it work? And this discussion is more about, we kind of identify what, maybe we need to start talking more about how. What can we leverage? What do we have to do to make it a realistic capabilities and deployable, workable environment? And so, I put out on the logistics side, you got the machine material supply, fire retardant if we're fighting forest fire or high-rise building fire, water, food, water, medicine on the disaster relief, and medical kit, equipment, and all kinds of other stuff. Mobile charging, how do we get the charging capability on site? And maybe not just charging, maybe more including other fuel supply. In the future, if it's hydrogen, okay, how do you get there? Alternative fuel or whatever. Okay. And of course, if it's a disaster is further away, we need to go from distance, maybe a few hundred miles from other cities and states to converge onto a disaster area. How do we deploy them? Do we put them on a truck and drive them over there? Do we fly them there? But we need a relay station. And of course, if mission lasts a little longer, we need technician on site, we need repair, we need spare parts and whatever. So that's some of the challenges on the logistics side. Now, on the infrastructure side, of course, the charging station, charging capabilities, fueling capabilities, landing sites. Do we land in the school zone parking lot, Target, Walmart, whatever, street corners? Can we? GA airports, talk about that a little bit later. Of course, we need dynamic and flexible airspace management. You can switch over to disaster response more quickly and maintain the feature capability of deconflicting, collision avoidance, and all that stuff. And there's a lot of work going right now. But how well those work can adapt to public service mission, we need to look into. And we talked about the fixed base operations. Either we can leverage the commercial eVTOL vertiports, hospital. I like the picture on the right-hand upper corner that, it's a drive-through area, but they put the heliport on top of that. Hey, that's a smart way to take advantage of the space that normally not utilized. And of course, on the lower left-hand corner is the fire station. That's just example of a fire station. We can probably put a elevated pad, vertipad on top of the rooftop. Maybe, if you see up right above the garages, and there's 4 fire engine garages, maybe on top of that, we can easily put some supporting pads on top, and medium, smaller size eVTOL can land and take off from there. And even landing on the ground probably can be done. And of course, one thing I like about the Air National Guard base, and we got a National Guard base everywhere, and they are very well set up for just about every aviation-related functionality. Trained mechanics, technician, operation, mission planning, whatever. So if we can base a fleet over there doing routine training and service maintenance or emergency, we can deploy them. I thought that's one of the very desirable operating base that we can station from. And of course, we talk about that. If you have to be deployed, do we have a charging truck? Do we have take advantage of the nearby disaster zones, outskirts, maybe the charging stations for the trucks still there, maybe a mobile charging generator, power bank, or like Beta is setting up ground and air charging stations, and if it's nearby, that will be usable. Of course, I always like the picture on the lower left-hand corner about the fueling stations. We see those, some of them mega, order of magnitude bigger than this one, all along the highways. In pretty much interstate highways, we see those huge stations. And guess what? I assume that we got enough space there. We can, and over time, the truck charging megawatt charging capability will be there. Could be a great staging area or relay stations. Of course, GA Airport, we talked about that once, that if you look at the map, that's a GA map in the US, and there's 19,000 airports in the US. Not all regularly are public use, only about 3,300 are public use airports able to receive public funds and so on. But during emergency, I don't see why we cannot negotiate and leveraging the private airports that take advantage of it. And in many cases, for eVTOL operation, we don't need a lot of long runways. So many of the small, even grass runways can be useful. And I show an example of a picture of the Bernie State Airport in Texas, just north of San Antonio. They got a 5,000 feet runway, 60 feet wide. It's privately owned, operated, and so on. And they have a pretty good traffic, 118 per day on average. I was there, just less than some month ago. I looked at that operation with the intention to see how would a GA airport be able to either adapt to or even convert to with charging power stations attached to a grid, have a solar generator, power bank, be able to support routine operations with eVTOL in and out over some time. And emergency, we can increase the capacity and turn it into a staging area. So I'm pretty encouraged by the possibility with a GA airport. And there's 1,800 aerodrome and landing sites in Europe also. So I think those are great assets that we have. Not as much in some other part of the world, but in Europe, in US, and to some degree in Canada, right? Of course, charging standards, we'll talk about that later, but that's my preference is that on the mega charger, which is in work at the SAE committee, try to make that compatible for the high power charging required for eVTOL. Now, for the lower power, like the 250 kilowatt level, or the Tesla, or the current available charging for the EVs, the compatibility may still need work. What is the standard? What's the plug? And what's the data exchange between those? But I like to see as much compatibility as possible so that there's a lot more flexibility in the future for eVTOL. Of course, the capability of the training and the autonomous airspace management. I was on the discussion yesterday on the new data link systems of eVTOL AAM type platform. Vehicle-to-vehicle communication can be leveraged by the ground stations as well. But all that has to be merged into an integrated system that may be supported by oversight by the FAA, with technology, a lot developed from NASA and other entities. Hopefully, with the support and integration by third-party technology vendors and so on, kind of like what we're doing right now. So, but the key point is that has to be supported and capable of supporting emergency or all kinds of public service missions. So that we'll talk about next time. But let me get back to kind of top, just so that this is something that I like to get you guys input and feedback. Is it worth considering maybe this topic could be a good one for another white paper? Or is it something that this working group can do to enable or to help enable the solutions and or the capabilities? Now it's time to talk about how we're going to enable it to make it happen, right? So open the floor. Everybody just jump in. Come on, I know you guys always have an idea. Right, Mike, I see Mike, are you in? Or Steve.
Yeah, hi. I think that, that we should set the goal pretty high. So the thought occurs to me for emergency services, you want, to be able to have a mobile charging system. And so we should define what that looks like using as green a technology as possible.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a, hydrogen or battery bank or something like that's semi based, right? A semi trailer that has a massive amount of charge capability for multiple different kind of vehicles.
Yep, I agree, 100% agree, because one of the things that we thought would be just conceptually, if it's a trailable device that get us to the emergency site. Quite often, my personal experience when Hurricane Sally went through my house, virtually right over my head on the hurricane eye. The whole area, basically is power out. So when we reach any staging area that we can park the airplanes and so on, take off and land, chances are we may not have power that we can plug in anywhere. And so if we can say power generation, as green as we can, use the renewable fuel if we can, power bank so that we can store, maybe with a deployable solar panel that we can complement the energy storage, and with the data bank, or not data bank, with the power bank, we can do that. So thank you, Steve. I think that, I think we were right. We should look further ahead and make sure whatever the capabilities are and need to be green while we're at it, right? If we're doing something new, might as well make it green. Don, you turn your camera on. You have some thoughts?
Yeah, Jai, when I look at this, one of the things we're working on, especially with NASA, we put in a couple of SBIRs for mobile, for these type of, mobile infrastructure deployment and also airspace management deployment systems, right? To like a UTM that's non-traditional, is we probably need to make sure we have some weather infrastructure with this. And I'm not just saying like normal, a ground-based, weather station, but potentially some mobile weather drones that could be deployed to collect data aloft. One of the things we're finding right now, and more people are recognizing this and coming, is that, the winds aloft and things like that are a big mystery. We've had a lot of drone companies coming to us saying, we're not able to run our scalable operations as efficiently as we'd like because of the lack of certainty. So we should be thinking about, LiDAR or deploying mobile, drones that could fly up and collect weather data, or in these areas, especially in very remote areas. We're working on with the wildfire stuff. We're working on concepts of using drones both to do profiles and to do weather scout over an area to collect the data to bring it into a micro model that would allow us to better understand how the fire behavior is going to change with real data. So this is some of the ideas I'll just throw out, and always available to contribute to a white paper on the very cutting edge ideas about how to use these capabilities to really increase flight efficiency, effectiveness, power optimization, all that good stuff.
Okay, great. Hey, Don, can you shoot me an email that I think there's more information I can probably squeeze out of you. Have a little more discussions. That's
Sure.
great thought, and I think yeah, we're thinking the same here. That I always believe that we should not be thinking about eVTOL just by itself, or AM by itself. I mean, it's really integrated enhancement of the capability, but we need to leverage other advancements like the drones, mapping out the situation, get the weather. I mean, it's we can integrate capability can be a lot greater than individual capabilities.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're doing now is, I don't know if you saw this, but the Washington Post came out with an article on our weather drone implementation up in Grand Forks. We're actually going to be deploying the weather drone commercially now, but supporting Grand Forks Air Force Base and other operations. So this is becoming a reality that is going to be very doable in the future. And so that's how we're going to really get a better handle on microclimates that today we, are kind of a mystery. And sometimes we get surprised by them, and it causes more chaos in a chaotic situation. Because, when you're trying to respond, I was a emergency manager director. I was a director for an EOC at one point. And, what you don't want to do is add more chaos that you like to get control of the data you can to reduce the chaos factor when chaos is occurring. Right. So, yeah. So I'll write you a note. Yeah, definitely write you a
Okay.
note.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah. That's really thoughtful. That I think that's a very good point that we should probably remind ourselves and everybody else that we're supposed to help make things better, not to add to the chaos. So we need to provide more solutions with added capabilities, but understand what the real world in the emerging situation really looks like, so that we're truly bringing solutions to the table. Other thoughts, guys? Marilena, I know you always have ideas.
Hi, hello, Johnny.
Hey,
Oof.
what time
Let me
is
think.
your place? In the evening, right?
Yes, it's late in the evening. I was listening. Yes, I do not know. Agree with you that it's better to predict the chaos before it's happening. So I think that's a good point. I was thinking of what our group does in Delft on swarms with drones. I think that's also quite impressive, and how they can predict, the different environments. So I would need to think about on this topic.
All right. Yeah. Please, everyone, you guys can all think about this topic and shoot me an email, shoot me a note, or I can give you a call. We can brainstorm. The meeting is really to kick it off and let everybody have the chance to think about it. And I need everybody's input. What do you think? Is this something that we should devote some attention, energy toward? Yep, absolutely. Okay. Hey.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. All right. Yeah, let's all do that. I know this. It really takes a collective wisdom to make it meaningful. So, and as soon as Secretary Lorenz join us, I'm going to switch over to her talk. And so
I'm here, Johnny, whenever you're ready.
Oh, okay. You're here. Hey, I tell you what. Hey, folks, let me thank you to come back in. All right. Now, see, we got a great Photoshop photo of Secretary Lorenz. Secretary Lorenz was appointed by Governor Laura Kelly in January of 2019 to lead the Kansas Department of Transportation With more than 25 years experience, she's recognized a national leader in the area of policy development, collaboration, and scenario planning. She was recently elected president of the Mid-America Association of State Transportation Officials. Now, that sounds quite impressive and important. So now, today, Secretary Lorenz is going to talk to us about past successes, positive trajectories. I'm sure you're all going to be enjoying her talk. Secretary, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. And Johnny, my understanding is someone will be available to help me advance the slides whenever I say.
Alina, are you there?
Yes. Do you guys see the presentation? I have it up.
I can
Yes.
see that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'll be advancing for you.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Alina. Thank you very much. So, and Johnny, thank you. It was wonderful to meet you when we were in San Francisco at the UC Berkeley conference. And really, I would say I was inspired by many conversations and really learned a lot. We'll talk a bit more about some of those lessons that I had the opportunity to learn. And I think in the aviation space, there are many past successes and what is, and I think a wonderful trajectory, particularly when we think about the public-private partnership aspect. There is absolutely a role for the private sector, but there's also a really important role for the public sector to play. And that intersection is so very important. And I want to thank everyone who's on the call today for your service and helping to figure out what the future can look like and how we can advance into multiple futures, quite honestly, but in a safe and effective sort of way. And I understand y'all are working on a roadmap, and that's hard to develop when you have so many different trends and different forces at play. But I've got a couple of thoughts to share with you around that as well. But really, the work that we do here in the public sector, which oftentimes is a calling, I think, is to make sure that we're building investments that are going to last and provide public good. So if we can move on, please, Lena, to the next slide. So I come from Kansas, and you might recognize this aviator, Amelia Earhart. And I think this is one of the quotes that I think is particularly relevant to your group, because some of us do have great runways that have already been built for us. And if you've got one, you should just go ahead and take off. But if you don't, it's, like grab a shovel and build one for yourself, and realize also that build one for those who will follow you. And I think that's ideal for the work that your group is doing. Is you're not just building constructs or infrastructure for today, but you're also building constructs and infrastructure for tomorrow. And so I applaud the work that you all are doing as you think about the future of aviation. Okay, so next slide, please. So when I talk about transportation, and I've been doing this for a while now, transportation isn't really just about roads and bridges or aviation. What transportation it really is it's a means to an end. It's about moving people and goods and data so that they can live their lives the way they want, so we can have national defense and prosperity. So we are about more than just the infrastructure piece. The why is really putting people at the center of what we do. Next slide. And so this is a picture that I really like, because when we think about making investments to stand the test of time, it's not just for us, but it's for our future generations and what we want to leave as Amelia, as her quote so nicely laid out. So one way to think about the future, next slide, please, is to realize that no one can predict the future, but what we can do is we can imagine scenarios, different kinds of futures. And then when you look at the way that different trends can combine and collide, and then overlay investment options across the various scenarios, and see where you might have some investments that make good sense across all the scenarios, and a couple of leap forward investment opportunities. That's what can propel you in a more certain sort of way in terms of investment. So we've done this work. I led some work for Governor Baker in Massachusetts, and did scenario planning for the Future of Transportation Commission in Massachusetts, likewise in Kansas. We had these scenarios: regional hubs, resiliency challenged, cities in advanced ag win the day in Kansas. And through this conversation, statewide conversation, that took 2 years, quite frankly, in Kansas to develop, we identified a $10 billion transportation program that passed with 4 hours to spare right before the legislature went home for an abbreviated COVID session. But I'd like to point out, I recognize that across our country, we can be fairly polarized. In Kansas, for example, we have a supermajority in the House and the Senate that are Republican and a Democratic governor. Yet I'm so happy to say that this new $10 billion transportation plan was approved by 94% of our legislature. I think infrastructure is one of the last places where we can really find some good bipartisan opportunities. So again, I applaud the work that you all are doing, because I think it is a chance to bring people together and really promote the national interest. Okay, next slide. And we do stand at really a unique time as you think about some of our challenges, recovering from the pandemic. I've talked a bit about politicization, extreme weather, Alice. I'm going to come back and talk about Alice in just a minute. And we all know that we have some workforce challenges as well, an ability to retain and keep some of the best of our workforce. But there are some great opportunities as well that I think can help us more than overcome our challenges. What's really nice is around IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. While you might debate whether it's the biggest thing since the New Deal, or if it's a 20 to 30% increase in some of our funding, what I would suggest the most important thing is now we have assurance over the next 5 years related to federal investment. I would now recognize FAA has reauthorization coming up next year. We also know there's a promise of technology to help both improve the efficiency of our system, but also our safety. And there's really this greater understanding, I think, across many sectors of the interconnectedness of action. When you take an action on one side of the equation, there's an offsetting action, and whether we're talking about climate or the importance of aviation connecting to a multimodal ecosphere, all of the pieces have to come together and work well, or you may have some real leap forward in one sector, but not really serve the best interest of your constituents. And I want to end with, and I'm not end, but on this slide, I think it's important for each person to think about what role do you want to play in really this unique time, and press forward with some great opportunities. And so my background is actually in psychology, and there's this thing called locus of control. And so some people on the right side, you'll see some folks have this external locus of control and really feel like the world happens to you. And sometimes on the challenges side, you can feel like a lot is weighing in on you. If you have a strong internal locus of control, you realize that you can be a positive change in your world, whether that your world is a municipal view, a state, or a national role. You can make a positive difference. And so that is something to balance as well, realizing that you can make a difference in the world in which you operate. Next slide. And so as we lead forward into some of the work that I'm leading at AASHTO, which is the National Association for State DOTs, I'm reminded of some of the words from John Kennedy. And here's the thing: you don't have to be a president to find challenges and really step up to the task. And so you'll recall when President Kennedy said, hey, we're going to go to the moon. We choose to do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And when you have a big goal, it will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is the one that we're willing to accept and unwilling to postpone. So in your life, I have no doubt that there is something, and this may be the working group where you can bring to bear all of your knowledge, expertise, and understanding of the network in which you operate to help advance, and I saw on one of your opening slides, to help improve emergency response services when people are in their biggest time of need. What can aviation be doing to help in their biggest time of need? Okay, next slide. So I'm going to harken back just a little bit to the work that we're doing at AASHTO and some of the scenario planning that we're doing. Next slide. And tie it over to asking, What is your role in advanced air mobility? So while the FAA may say that they are going to, have jurisdiction over every single blade of grass, that doesn't mean that there isn't a role for all of us to play when we take a look at it. And Johnny, you were at the conference at Berkeley, and think about the intersection, not just of the airspace, but what about local land use and permitting and regional planning and modeling? And what might a potential role for the state be in air traffic management? I know Utah is looking at corridors, the airspace above some of their highways, and wondering if those future air corridors are a way to both deliver really time sensitive and high value cargo. So lots of questions being asked about what role a variety of units of governments and jurisdictions can play. Next slide. It's important for us not to think that we have to build all new infrastructure to accommodate the changing nature of aviation, and instead, can we repurpose some of the already built infrastructure we have? What can we do in terms of modernizing some of our aviation facilities? Can we add charging stations, not only for cars, but as we think about electric aircraft as well? So I thought that was another real important lesson that I took away from the conference, was don't build all new. Let's just try to modify some of what we already have, some of our existing infrastructure. Okay, next slide. Which leads me then to this concept around what will be the defining vision for what state departments of transportation can deliver in the next decade? What is our next era of transportation going to look like? And so I come from Kansas, and you might think about Eisenhower, one of our favorite sons, so to speak. And his vision, many people think his vision was the interstate, to connect sea to shining sea. Really, his vision was national defense and prosperity implemented through a national interstate system, which he was able to deliver, well, it took us many years to deliver, but he was the one that was able to get Congress to authorize that action. It's really been since that time, we have not really had a strong national vision since that time related to transportation. And so I've really challenged our state DOTs to identify what can we do both within each of our states and collectively for a new era of transportation. And I'll talk a bit more about that. So next slide, please. So what can we deliver for Americans? So that's the big vision via a moonshot or 2 or 3, which would be a big project scale, or maybe a new way of thinking. And then a menu of strategies or actions that state DOTs can deploy, recognizing that each state has sort of a different political context and a different physical context. Also, we're in different states of maturity. So, for example, Kansas, in many ways, a very rural state, isn't as advanced in technology as, say, Utah or Georgia, for example. So we will have a range of strategies that we can plug into at a different level of maturity vis-a-vis those other states. The important thing is that we're all moving in the same direction, on the same trajectory. Certainly, I chair the Aviation Council for AASHTO, and we're working closely with NASAO and would welcome your thoughts as well as to what are a range of strategies that state DOTs could take to advance aviation as well. Next slide. And so far, more than 27 states have been involved in crafting this vision, and we have continued outreach over the summer to gather more input. Next slide. Also, very importantly, is that we're not just talking to ourselves, but we've brought in, at this point, over 30 what we would call non-traditional partners. So everything from the Reason Foundation to Space Florida to Lilium to the Nature Conservancy. And we're really asking partners that we maybe haven't engaged with often to challenge us and to push us at AASHTO to think differently and really put people at the center of our vision and what we'll deliver for America. Next slide. So these are some of the trends that we've looked at. First is that we recognize that our growth in America is slowing. That might have an impact on where and how much we invest and in what kind of transportation infrastructure. Next slide. This is Alice. I want to introduce you to Alice. Asset limited, income constrained, employed, essentially the working poor. About 42% of Americans can't afford basic costs. In one of the richest nations in the world, that is something that I take very seriously. And oftentimes the working poor spend a disproportionate amount of their income on transportation. I would challenge you all as you have conversations about what the future of aviation looks like for your working group to consider the variety of trends that we see in America related to the people part and think about what role advanced aviation can play to improve people's lives. Next slide. And we're certainly looking at where we anticipate growth in trade and logistics sectors. Next slide. And even taking a look at some weather impacts, understanding that as we see drought conditions expand and deepen, it means that we will be producing different crops in different parts of the nation, and that may have an impact on the way we need to transport those crops. Next slide. This one I find to be very hopeful and challenging at the same time. It's the rate of adoption. Americans are adopting new technology at an acceleratingly quick pace. Part of that has to do, if you look back on the left part of this slide, electricity and telephone, you had to build out that physical infrastructure. Now on the right side, when you think about like a smartphone or a tablet adoption, because it's not as physically based, you can adopt more quickly, but also our minds have opened up in America. We say like, hey, I want that new phone. I want the newest tablet. So this ability to adapt and adopt is critically important as you think about the future of aviation. Next slide. And certainly we see energy trends around EV, electric vehicle sales, not only for cars, vehicles, but also for aircraft. And then, of course, you think about the ripple effect of that as it relates then to motor fuel sales tax and what we can, as state DOTs, rely on for revenue. Next slide. And then these are some risks and resiliency signposts that we take a look at as it relates to climate change and infectious disease and debt crisis, all the other things that contribute to our ecosystem in America and across the world, and we think about what impacts does that have on people as well as the transport that they will need. Which has then led us to, next slide, please. What is the state DOT vision for transportation, our new era? It's very focused on people. People are in the center, and then you can see the orbit around. And when we talk about community-centered or people-centered, that's very scalable. It might be your neighborhood, it could be your community, your state, or a multi-state region. And the kinds of goals we have for a transportation system that would be clean and sustainable, healthy and thriving, those are the goals to which we will aspire. Next slide. And so what are our moonshots? It's not like a 10% improvement. What are giant, jump forward, audacious projects and pure science fiction kinds of things that we want to achieve by the end of the decade? And here are a couple of very broad strokes in terms of things that we're talking about. Next slide. So what if we reorient our goals and investment to support communities, putting people at the center of what we're talking about? Next slide. What if that looks like we think about how they're operated and managed? In your next slide, you're going to see another idea. What if we change the way people experience transportation so that you have a range of options when you pick up your phone in the morning? Are you going to call a shared vehicle? Are you going to take an air taxi? Now, these are long-term things, I realize. I also wonder, how do you pay for all of this kind of choice? And where is the balance between, right, providing choice for everyone and the same cost to everyone? So we will have to change and evolve our pricing models. But this is the way of the future. And I really appreciate the work that your group is doing to think about the most I think the most important pieces, which is the response piece, the emergency response piece, so vitally important to take advantage of new opportunities and new technologies. Next slide. So we'll be defining a spectrum of actions, a range of actions around each of these points, whether it's partnerships or human resources or technology and data. Next slide. And these partnerships, both supporting from the non-traditional partners like housing and public health. Some of the conversations we've had have been around, typically you look to the HHS side of things to be scheduling rides to healthcare providers. Perhaps that's something that a DOT would be better at so that we can begin to move forward with community visions and leverage the delivery capacity that we have within state DOTs to help our local partners. And we certainly see that under IIJA with all the discretionary grant dollars that are available. And we know our cities and counties, some have the capacity to deliver those discretionary dollars, and others, quite frankly, don't, particularly the smaller entities. Next slide. And then lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about an NCHRP, so it's part of the Transportation Research Board. Their work to put together a guidebook on implementing operational capabilities. And really, next slide, please. That focus is very much around roles and responsibility of federal, state, and local agencies, talking about UAS deployment and pathways, and ways to move forward around roles and key issues. Again, a lot of this has to do with jurisdictional responsibilities and regulatory responsibilities. Next slide. And Johnny, coming out of the conversation that we had at Berkeley, we recognize, I would say the project panel is made up currently of those blue boxes, but we realize that we need to bring some local government and some private sector into the project panel as these issues are explored and discussed. Next slide. And lastly, I'd like to point out that AASHTO, again, this is the Association of State Transportation Organizations. We do have a UAS-AAM, an intercommittee working group that serves to connect both with state DOT, so we as the CEOs can better understand what's going on in this space, but also, next slide, to collaborate with partners, so working closely with NASAO and FAA and other groups to support AAM or Advanced Air Mobility legislation in Congress, and making sure that our state CEOs understand best practices and operational updates. All right, and next slide. And this is just a story I'd like to share with you. It was in November of 2019. I had the opportunity to go with Bob Brock. He's the aviation director for KDOT. And we were one of the pilot programs selected by FAA. And we had the opportunity to travel to Manhattan, Kansas in coordination with Kansas State University to do the first beyond line of sight flight for a drone. And what I loved about driving out that cold morning with Bob is it sort of gave me this feeling of like what it might have been like to travel for Kitty Hawk. Because I didn't really know if this was going to be a big deal or not a big deal. But how often in your career do you have the opportunity to work on something where you really might be making a big difference for something that hasn't been done yet before? And so I think you all have a beautiful opportunity in front of you, and I wish you all the best as you make sure we move into this space safely, but balanced with urgency. I have had, and now the last slide, please. I've had the good opportunity in my life to bounce back and forth from the public and private sector. So both on the consulting side and then on the public side. And what I would tell you is kind of my North Star is to have public sector principles and private sector urgency. And so with that, I'll conclude, and I'm happy to take a minute or two of questions if anyone has any.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, it's as expected, very insightful and very inspiring. So I'm glad that we have people like you at the leadership position, thinking the broader spectrum and I like to believe that the AAM eVTOL is a moonshot opportunity that if we work together, we can make it happen the right way and safely, and put people in the center. And I think that's really what we're all thinking in our working group and in the broader community. At least in our working group, we say, hey, let's figure out how to leverage the development and the technology to help people and save lives. Okay, all right, that's if we can do some of that, that's accomplished a lot. Now,
I'm going to take a quick picture, Johnny, because I'm going to tweet this out in a little bit. Okay, thank you.
There you go. All right. So, hey, folks, I think we have questions. Go ahead.
Hi, Secretary Lorenz. My name is Carl Dietrich. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Jump Arrow, and we're developing an electric VTOL aircraft to help first responders get to the scene of an emergency as quickly as possible. One of the things that we're exploring is partnerships with state governments that have the ability and the regulations to implement public use aircraft operations. And I'm curious if you are aware of whether you or any of your fellow leaders in state departments of transportation are interested in aggressively pursuing those options, particularly for public use cases, because I feel like these are cases where we can show to the general public the value of this technology very clearly. And I'm just wondering if there have been discussions along those lines in your circle.
So I would suggest, Carl, if maybe Johnny, if you could either share my contact information with Carl or connect Carl and me. What I would want to do, Carl, is connect you with Bobby Walston and other folks. So in this working group that I was talking about that AASHTO has, and we also coordinate with NASAO and others, but I think that it's exactly the group to connect you with, because that's that's very much their charge. And you realize, like, within a state, some DOTs have aviation within their departments, and in other cases, aviation sits outside the state DOT. So that's why we are very intentional about about this working group that looks at advanced air mobility, but also coordinates with NASAO, because it's there's just all kinds of opportunities for collaboration, but also if there's opportunity for collaboration, there's also opportunity for not collaboration. And we're trying to stitch it all together.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I look forward to following up.
So I would really like that. And you'll find Bobby and Bob Brock from Kansas. And I think Brian is also on this group from KDOT, but we would be more than happy. Some combination of Bobby and Bob will be more than happy to work with, to have a conversation with you, I'm sure.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And Don, is that Don that has the hands up?
Yes, Secretary Lorenz, thanks for spending time today. This is really important that we have access to leadership like you at the state level, so we can understand what your vision is, and also maybe generate some ideas for you on things that folks sometimes don't talk about as being a priority. I'm True Weather Solutions, Don Birchall from True Weather Solutions. What we're doing is we're working with a lot of the state DOTs to look at the weather infrastructure requirements for advanced air mobility. It's going to be a lot different than it is for general aviation or helicopter or regular operations. And that's because of the micro weather challenges associated with flying long distances without having a pilot on the aircraft, right? So we're looking at this gap problem for low altitude weather, and working on public-private partnership, quite frankly. I was the National Weather Service Science and Technology Director for 4 years, and what I'm trying to do is get some of the really good technology that's in the labs and universities. We have more science on the shelf than we're using today because of various reasons. There's a lot of structural issues, and we want to unleash that and bring it into the states. And part of this is recognizing that the weather infrastructure has to be looked at with all the other infrastructure. And if you are putting in any state smart grants with DOT, really, if you get this in there early and you get it in right, it's really budget dust compared to everything else. But the payback on understanding the atmosphere and using that data to really optimize flight time, get more flight time is really, really remarkable. And so I just want to, kind of just mention that so you understood it. We're actually working with Utah,
good.
DOT, Jared, and he's under the aviation division. And I actually briefed the Utah legislature on the idea of weather infrastructure and repurposing what is already available, but then all additive on top of that are the novel sensors that are needed. Yep.
So Don, I'm glad to hear, good that you know Jared. He would be another great contact for Carl. He's working really hard in that space. And I would say, in a very primitive sort of way, previously when I was at KDOT, so in the 2000s, we would say, hey, everybody's within 30 miles of air ambulance service, which is important in our state because it's so rural. What we didn't say is everyone's within 30 minutes of air ambulance service on a clear day.
Thank you.
And so, once we figured that out, we're like, oh, okay. So I can appreciate the weather piece, and the instrumentation piece. So thank you.
And I'll tell you, I've been following the helicopter challenges for weather for a long time, and really there are ways to really significantly up the game there. And that's what we want to do. We want to demonstrate that. So I appreciate your understanding of it. And I'll guess Carl and Jared know each other. So maybe again, Johnny, you can get me Carl's information and I can reach out if that's okay, Secretary Lorenz.
Sure, of course. No, I'm all about the connections and the collaboration. I see maybe 2 quick questions and then I'm going to need to scoot Johnny. Or
Okay.
I see Steven's got his hand up and Nick, so.
Go ahead.
This is Steve. Hi, Secretary Lorenz. I appreciate your time. Ziva Aero, like Carl's company, is located in Tacoma, Washington, and we are targeting emergency medical services as well. We're flying actually a full-scale prototype now, so we feel like we've made great strides in the eVTOL space. But we also look for input, and I was surprised to see Lilium on your partnership board, which is a wholly German company. And there are many fine examples of American-based eVTOL companies that perhaps you could be partnering with, and Ziva is one of those.
Sure. I am making a note right now. Got it. Mm-hmm.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Nick.
Yes, Secretary, just an observation that I'm part of the National Academy of Engineering committee that looked at advanced air mobility, and we found that the rural states probably had more to gain than the urban environments, and that it wasn't recognized very much. We used to call it urban air mobility. You have so many citizens that are 30 or 40 miles down a 2-lane dirt highway that have almost no connection to civilization, that doesn't take 2 or 3 hours, and a dedicated driver, which means economically there are many people isolated. So we found that the idea of having air mobility to bring prescription drugs, transportation means, all that other stuff, connecting those folks is very important. Second thing,
and I agree with you on both counts. Actually, on both counts. There is a view that it's that advanced air mobility is urban air mobility. There is certainly, so Nick, yes. I would underscore, and whatever this group can do to help sort of debunk that, I think is very important, because I agree, not only in like delivering medication, but on the emergency services part.
Exactly.
Boy. So I appreciate the
and
work
food for shut-ins. Food for shut-ins. I'll offer up the Rural Electric Cooperative System is an example of what probably wants to take place, and it is probably as important for rural areas as it is for urban areas, or more.
Nick, and I've got a fantastic presentation about rural electric co-ops, which is also, I think, a great framework or way of thinking about expanding broadband.
Thank you. That's exactly right, because it's all part of the same pie. I'll offer a second observation is that, and you mentioned it too, the idea of setting up circumstances where private industry moved into a place, and that the capital actually comes from private industry, but the government creates the environment and creates the utilities that can be used by these private entities, because the government can't be inventing the vehicles and can't be operating them. They'll be operated by profit-making organizations, but that we can create in government ability for them to grow into the space. And I'll offer an example, and it's going to be a bit of critical. The idea of detect and avoid for air vehicles in the future world is a bankrupt idea. And that in fact, if we hand down to all the vehicles in the system, they have to detect everyone around them and avoid them, then what we've done is we've missed the opportunity to create a utility where every vehicle is networked together and can avoid each other. And we've added then to this a CVS prescription drug delivery system the need to have a $5,000 FLIR to look for everyone else around them. And I think the recognizing the burden of detect and avoid actually creates an impediment toward the future growth of this national airspace system.
Okay, so Nick, I didn't follow all of that.
I'll explain it very, very briefly.
No, buddy, I
get off
gotta
the
go. I've
stage.
got to move on to my next call.
Yeah,
But
well,
I am not great on the technology side of things, but you certainly had me on rural states, the value there, and on the rural electric co-op approach. That for sure. And then I have to admit, you kind of lost me as we got into some of the details. All right, everybody,
Well,
best wishes.
thank you
Let me
so
know how I
much.
can help.
And yeah, we'll really appreciate your time and great insight. And we'll keep our team. I hope this is not the end of our dialogue. We'll continue to explore the future and possibilities.
Yes, please.
And anybody who have interest in connecting generational dialogue with Secretary, get with me or Alina. We'll make sure the conversation will
Continues.
keep going and
All right.
expand. Thank you
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much.
Be safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right. Thank you,
you.
everybody. I'll see you guys next time.
You bet. Good job.